I think that it means that we're in serious trouble in lots of cities because the authorities, just like with the grooming gangs, are running scared of being accused of being Islamophobic.
Is this an intervention that should worry anyone who cares about sovereignty? Absolutely. Will it be on the same kind of level of things that we've seen in the past? The jury is still very much out.
It's just a reminder of what freedom is and what having no freedom means. You know, a brutal, vicious Islamist regime has kept people in check.
Hello and welcome back to the Spike podcast. Happy New Year. I'm Fraser Myers and I'm absolutely thrilled to be joined as ever by Spike's editor, Tom Slater.
Hello, Happy New Year to you.
And we're delighted to be welcoming the director of the Academy of Ideas, Claire Fox.
Great to be with you.
Loads to talk about today. We will be discussing Trump's invasion of Venezuela, the protests in Iran, and the lies about Maccabi Tel Aviv. If you're listening to the Spike podcast on the day it comes out, then today, or January 9th, is Quitters Friday. This is the day when most people abandon their New Year's resolution. This year, do not let it be you, especially if you've got a great idea for a business or a side hustle. 2026 is the year you should launch it. Instead of letting another 12 months slip you by, let this be the year that everything changes. Maybe you've got an idea you can't shake, or a special skill that you could monetize, or a shop you've already designed in your head. With Shopify, it has never been easier to turn those dreams into reality. Shopify gives you everything you need to sell online and in person. You'll be joining the millions of entrepreneurs who've already made this leap, from first-time business owners just getting started to mega brands like Tesla, Pepsi, Gymshark, and Mattel. Shopify gives you all the tools you need to easily build your dream shop. You can choose from hundreds of beautiful templates that you can then customize to match your brand. The setup is really fast, thanks to Shopify's groundbreaking AI tools. They'll help you write product descriptions and headlines and help you edit photos so everything looks as best it can. Marketing is built in too. You can create entire email and social media campaigns that will reach customers wherever they scroll. And as your business grows, Shopify grows with you. You'll be able to handle more orders, expand to new markets, and do it all from the same dashboard. So, in 2026, stop waiting and start selling with Shopify. Sign up for your £1 per month trial period and start selling today at shopify.co.uk/spiked. Go to shopify.co.uk/spiked. That's shopify.co.uk/spiked. Hear your first this new year with Shopify by your side. So let's kick off with the invasion of Venezuela. This was a very short invasion, 2.5 hours. A special forces mission went in to capture Nicolas Maduro and his wife. He's currently in New York on remand. He's been accused of narco-terrorism, of drug trafficking, of holding weapons, all kinds of things like that. It does seem as if the shock and awe of the military success, the cleanliness of it, the seeming low levels of casualties, things like that, the speed of it has distracted people from actually what should be some more principled concerns, such as, are we really happy with the United States invading a sovereign country and toppling their leader?
I think that's what's confusing because initially when it happened, I was a bit like, wowza, this is like good stuff, right? And it was like watching a film or I couldn't quite believe it. And technically, it was superb. The fact that nobody had even got a hint of it, that it was kept so quiet, you just thought, this is an impressive thing to have occurred. American power at its kind of most, wily and sophisticated in a way. And of course, then you think, and by the way, and I was also, I can't stand Maduro, and that might sound a stupid thing to say, but it drives me mad that so many people, particularly from the left in the UK, are so absolutely craven in their support for Venezuelan socialism when the people of Venezuela really suffered under that regime. So, in some ways you just go, wow, that's brilliant. But it didn't take long to think, can they do that? Are they allowed to do that? And of course, initially you think, are they allowed to do it? Because you kind of go along with the conventional, I think there's rules around this sort of thing.
International law.
But the point that but exactly, as soon as I heard the words international law, said by somebody else, I realized this was adding to nothing. Of course, the big thing is sovereignty. I mean, that is the issue. You have to be absolutely clear that the many tyrants and dictators around the world who one wants to see the end of, you want to see them taken down by the people of their country. You do not want to give permission to allow people to go in and just take people out. And so, a sort of defensive posture very quickly is, oh, if they can do this, they could do the same with Putin, or they could do the same with Xi, or, actually not quite so easily. But conversely, and much more importantly, it obviously says to Putin, it's okay to go in and topple, because he would use the same arguments. Zelensky was illegitimate as a leader. He didn't have popular support. Actually, things which are not entirely untrue. That there's claims that it's in our sphere of influence. We have a right to do it. They are indeed what Putin says. Xi will say the same, no doubt, about Taiwan. So unless you're going to basically say that this is sovereignty is over, that anyone can wander into any country, even though I'm delighted for the people of Venezuela to see the back of that brutal dictator, we've seen very quickly subsequently that the regime is still in place. And this is not regime change. This is regime as dictated by the US.
Tom, what's your take on it?
No, I think that's very well put. And one can, at the same time, make a principled stance against this kind of intervention for all the reasons that you sketch out there, Claire, whilst also wanting to make clear what this isn't, I suppose, because I think there is a tendency, and Daniel McCarthy talks about this on Brendan's podcast this week, to project everything onto the kind of Iraq war script, which is not necessarily very useful if we're trying to work out what it is that we might be opposing here as much as anything else. It does seem that Trumpist foreign policy, whilst often kind of caricatured as excessively isolationist, kind of pulling the drawbridge up over his 2 terms, has often been willing to intervene on the world stage, but in a kind of get in and get out sort of fashion. If you think about dropping the mother of all bombs on Afghanistan, if you think about taking out Soleimani, if you think about the more recent interventions in Iran with Israel, as well as this in Venezuela, what you're dealing with is a very different policy set. It seems to be very much bound up in a kind of revivified idea of the Don-roe doctrine, or the Don-roe doctrine, as he dubbed it. This idea that any kind of external interference in the Americas is a problem from the perspective of America's national interest and hegemony in the region, and also that when it comes to what's going to happen next, that you are going to have not nearly anywhere near the level of, shall we say, idealism or maybe utopianism, which attended the interventions in places like Iraq and Afghanistan over the course of the past 30 years. The fact that it does seem that the regime is going to stay in place, at least for the time being, without Maduro, under the stewardship of Rodriguez, who seemed to have been kind of playing this game of presenting herself as a kind of chavista that the Americans might be able to do business with for some time now. That is much more going to be the script. That said, when you have Trump coming out saying things like, we're going to run Venezuela, we're going to take control of it until such time as its oil industry is back up and running, with something which could take years and years and years. Still, the scope for mission creep or for getting bogged down in the way that other American administrations have is still very much there. So is this an intervention that should worry anyone who cares about sovereignty? Absolutely. Will it be on the same kind of level of things that we've seen in the past? The jury is still very much out there. And it does seem that what we're dealing with here is not that kind of Western liberal interventionism, the idea that you will democracy build, nation build, and take a very kind of idealistic, almost religious zeal out into the world to reshape it. What you have here is a kind of strident sense amongst the Trumpists of America's national interest, the need to assert its might. And you do sense that any entanglements might be tempered from the fact that Donald Trump is not just by instinct willing to get bogged down in the ways that maybe previous administrations were. So yes, one can oppose it whilst also being quite clear-eyed about what it is that's being asserted here, I suppose.
And before we move on to talk about Donald Trump's designs on other countries and other parts of the world, people will be, I'm sure, screaming in the comments, oil, oil, oil. It is worth stressing that yes, Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves in the world, but the state of the industry is so bad that experts estimate that it would cost $100 billion of investment at least to revive it back to where it should be in order to turn a profit. So the idea that this was a raid simply about stealing some oil for his chums in, in Texas or wherever it might be. It just doesn't quite wash, even if Donald Trump himself, oddly, likes to play that up.
But I think he might believe that. I imagine at some high level meeting, somebody said there's lots of oil there, and he went, yes, we're off. It's kind of like Landman got mad. He was like, let's go in there. But that's not the same as saying that that's what's driving it.
Yeah.
But I think that first of all, we should have a certain humility here and say that it's not entirely clear what will happen because it's a new phase of international relations. But unintended consequences of overriding sovereignty and going into someone's country, in that sense, there have been past examples of toppling dictators and then getting into a complete mess. And I completely agree with that point that you made that was on Brendan's podcast about not just going Iraq, but it is also the case that Saddam Hussein was worth toppling, right? And if you were to go around gauging all the people, that's what I'm saying, you'd be toppling quite a lot of people.
Yeah.
That's not quite the same as saying it's a similar thing. I think what's really interesting for us, and I'm sure that Spikes will be looking at this, certainly at the Academy of Ideas, something we want to think about, is that the international law, mantra meme is now in disarray.
Yeah.
But it also was never, it wasn't as though we had international law and a rules-based system that led to peace, because it was precisely under that regime that we have seen, in fact, the West justify interventions internationally, brutal interventions with terrible consequences under that rules-based system. The idea that this is so much worse because it tears up international law completely misses the point. And in fact, it gives a lie to international law because everyone now doesn't know what to do. And even Starmer is forced to be pragmatic because he's like, oh, yeah, well, we kind of want to do a deal with Trump. We don't want to fall out with them over this. We're not quite sure what to say. Oh, one thing, I've got no idea how true this is, but there's certainly the Venezuelan diaspora are definitely cheering in the streets. By the way, the Venezuelan diaspora in America are, as we speak, being potentially deported home. So they're receiving end of another of Trump's policies in terms of slightly contradictory. But anyway, but actually, I do know some people who are, have friends in Venezuela who say there's not quite cheering in the streets. People are staying at home. They're frightened. And they're confused. And that was even before the regime change happened, because it's a kind of very unstable place. And I think that we're going to go on to talk about it, but if you just contrast it with somewhere like Iran, there aren't people on the streets who are demanding this Venezuelan revolution. Even though people despised Maduro in millions, it's not the same as saying that there was a popular revolution against him. And so I think that means the people are absent from this. That's always dangerous.
And we should talk a bit about some of the other, countries that have come to the fore recently. Of course, Donald Trump is talking about other Latin American countries, but most pertinent to us is Donald Trump's designs on Greenland, which is, of course, the sovereign territory of Denmark. And that seems to be one of the few areas where you do see Europe and other NATO members, at least in words, saying, hands off. Greenland isn't for sale or for Donald Trump.
No, and it's quite clear that any principled stance begins and ends with the future of Greenland should be decided by the Greenlanders. There is obviously the complication of the fact that sovereignty in relation to Greenland is a historically vexed topic. You only really need to look at a map to recognise the controversy of the fact that it happens to be under the Danish kingdom at this particular point in history. Donald Trump did try to purchase Greenland during his first term, I believe. I think it was back in 2019, because of the fact that particularly with a rising China and Russia as well, the Arctic is going to become increasingly important in a way that it was during the Cold War. So this is a question that isn't going away. You can't help but feel that the very bellicose and kind of absurd way in which various Trumpist outriders have made clear their designs on Greenland probably might have actually scuppered a slightly more subtle way that they could have, increased their presence there, because they obviously do have a space base, originally an air base already on the island itself. That maybe that might have actually halted any kind of more serious kind of process where that is concerned. But
meme of the giant golden Trump hotel in the middle of Nook, I don't think particularly helped.
I think that where it is complicated is that split sovereignty question, because I do think it is worth noting that in a deal in, I think it was 1916, America sold Denmark Greenland, basically, and said, well, we or handed over sovereignty on the basis that they'd have the Virgin Islands, right? So this was a kind of, Greenland has been like passed around in that way. So this idea of America buying the Virgin Islands, then it comes back to the Greenland question, and you think, wow, this is the way people treat sovereignty. And I think it is a vexed issue, because I heard some Greenland independence people saying, self-determination should be decided by us, not by Denmark, not by America. So I think that's like worth noting, that it's a complicated issue. But on the other hand, it's also the case that because Greenland's sovereignty is in the hands of Denmark, we know from even things like the Chagos Islands and all the rest of it, messing around with these sovereignty questions in Europe can lead to the betrayal of ordinary people's capacity to self-determine their future.
We should talk about the protests in Iran. These are some of the biggest protests, at least since 2022, with the Women Life Freedom protests. They've now spread to a majority of Iranian provinces. It began as a kind of economic question. The Iranian economy is a basket case, but it has broadened out into a general anti-regime protest, almost revolution. Claire, the thing that's struck a lot of us is how little enthusiasm there is for this in the West, and even on places like the BBC, the sheer lack of coverage has been really quite striking. When we know they do have reporters who are able to go there.
It's so weird, isn't it? I mean, this is like a genuinely inspiring movement. I also have been tracking, for obvious reasons, the bravery and the courage of women pulling off their veils over recent years. And that also doesn't get very much in the way of support. I mean, there's all sorts of potential explanations, but, we have to remember that in the West, Khomeini and the revolution against the Shah was welcomed and greeted by liberal characters.
Yeah.
And the Iranian support for those forces that are anti-Israel has to come into the factor. I mean, there is there's something about criticizing Iran that has become synonymous with somehow being pro-Israel. And I do suspect that there's a kind of element of the BBC going, oh, we're not quite sure. I thought it was hilarious when John Simpson proclaimed that the reason why they weren't able to speak out about the protests in Iran was they didn't have anyone on the ground, and therefore they couldn't assert what was happening. You think, just hold on a minute, you haven't got anyone in Gaza, and you never shut up asserting what was happening on the ground. Even if you did get that information from Hamas sources, you were still happy to put it out there. So there is a discomfort in that. It does look, by the way, as though this is potentially much more significant than just protest movement now, because there's strikes, there's shopkeepers and bazaar holders coming out. It's built every day. Already today, this time today, there's greater activity on the streets than there has been during the daytime, because the protests have been at night. I mean, the bravery of these people. And there's a really brilliant little film of a lady with blood streaming down her face. And she says, I've been dead for 45 years, so I'm not afraid.
Yeah.
I want my freedom. I want to be alive. And that's, I think, why it matters, apart from anything else. It's just a reminder of what freedom is and what having no freedom means. A brutal, vicious Islamist regime has kept people in check and has deprived them of basic rights in terms of women's rights and of the capacity to act as individual and autonomous citizens. And people are now saying, we can't stand this. We're throwing off the shackles. Of course, Iran having a revolution is difficult, and it will be destabilizing, and there will be scary bits, and there could be clampdowns. And the fact that they're bringing in these external forces from Iraq and all over the place is worrying. And of course, I'm sitting there thinking, well, I don't know if I want a king back or the Shah back or whatever, right? It's not like as though you're kind of like enthusiastic for an autocratic ruler. I see, by the way, that the Kurds have come out and said they support the Shah returning. So, you got all sorts of weird and mad things. But basically, people want to get rid of the Islamic regime in Iran, and I can't wait for that to happen on behalf of the people of Iran.
And Tom, there is this reticence to criticize anything that has the word Islam in it, even if it is this obviously brutal theocratic regime that we would never put up with for a second in the West.
You can't help but feel the disjoint between how, say, us three or many people in our world of politics, the tremendous inspiration we're taking from these protests, but how they're leaving a lot of people sort of nonplussed. Even when it is reported on, it's in a kind of quite cursory fashion. It's certainly not inspiring the kind of solidarity that you might expect if this was any other place in the world, if it wasn't wrapped up in the Israel question, if it wasn't wrapped up in the strange almost identity politics, which is now applied to geopolitical affairs, in which people are quite funny about anything with the word Islamic in it. As Claire was saying, this is a tremendous challenge to the authority of the Islamic regime. These, it's theocratic scumbags who've been squatting over a great civilization for decades now. And whilst one shouldn't make hasty predictions, whilst one shouldn't be too kind of blind optimistic about what happens next, it's clear that we're in a kind of cycle of protest now in recent years, which is increasingly degrading the authority, if not ultimately the kind of stranglehold that regime has. It's worth noting that during the Women Life Freedom protest, you already start to see certain cracks insofar as a reticence on the part of the security services in cracking down to the full extent. It'll be interesting to see if that is repeated to any extent. But also the broader social base now of the agitation against the Ayatollah is really striking. The fact that the shopkeepers and the people from the bazaars have been at the centre of this is really telling, because that used to be a key support base, or was a key support base in 79 during the revolution. This isn't just about the kind of upper middle class frustrated they can't go abroad as much, or students who are kind of reared on quote unquote Western values and therefore are a slightly different proposition. This is something which is much broader, and it's encompassing the economics, the fact that the place is hopelessly corrupt, that this isn't just about the sanctions. This is a regime that, is lining its own pockets, meanwhile is struggling to even provide kind of water to the various cities in Iran. But the fact that it's so quickly become political, the fact that once again we're hearing chants of death to the dictator, yes, a bit of Shah nostalgia as well, but even that in itself is a damning indictment of how terribly that country has been run, and with such an iron fist. So we all, I think, express heartfelt solidarity, hope that this regime is coming to a close, which would be, if it does happen at some point in the future, would be tremendously significant, not simply for the people of Iran first and foremost, but also for the symbolic and strategic importance of that horrific regime in terms of Islamism across the globe and in the region. It would be such a tremendous blow to that utterly despicable sort of neo-fascistic ideology, which has menaced not just their near neighbours but large parts of the world over recent decades. So it's hard to it's hard to find the words to describe how significant what is going on there, even if one doesn't want to get too ahead of oneself about what might happen in the immediate future.
Let's come back close to home and talk about the Maccabi Tel Aviv ban. This is back in the spotlight because West Midlands police have been hauled repeatedly in front of Parliament to explain their inexplicable and frankly deranged behaviour over this issue. So people may recall that the Maccabi Tel Aviv fans from Israel were banned from attending an away game with Aston Villa. At the time, the police put out this idea that it was because the Israeli fans were thugs, that they were a menace to the local community. We knew that wasn't true. We knew that that was slightly suspect, but it's since emerged that this is based on entirely fabricated intelligence. The police actually knew that they suspected that local Muslims would come armed in the event of Maccabi Tel Aviv fans turning up. They were using AI tools to basically find evidence of matches where Maccabi fans had been violent. These generated matches that simply did not take place, but they were used as further evidence to justify this ban. All of it, Claire, speaks to really, I mean, it's not simply policing errors, but actually a degree of corruption of police being allowed to be influenced by Islamic sectarians who wanted these Israeli fans out of their town, out of the UK, and they simply bowed to the pressure from those groups.
Yeah, I mean, oh God, this is potentially one of the greatest policing scandals of recent decades. I mean, it's a very big scandal, this. I have to give some credit to Nick Timothy, the Tory MP, but also Ian Austin, the former Labour MPs now in the Lords, who really kind of just gone on and on and on and kind of forced this and really looked into it. And I, there's some credit there. And then it's been picked up by things like the Sunday Times, and they've done some really good journalism on it. So good. I think the thing is that this is instinctively what a lot of us thought had happened, but then you think you're being madly conspiratorial, and then you discover that actually it was worse than you imagined. And it is so frightening that you got into a situation where the narrative simply became the Maccabi fans, these Israeli thugs, cannot be allowed anywhere into the UK because they will lead to destruction and violence. And very quickly you'd get into child murderers and genocide apologists and all the rest of it, because it became that combination of anti-Israel, anti-Zionist. They are all, are responsible for these terrible things that have happened in Gaza and so on and so forth. And it was just extraordinary, because you had a situation where somebody like Emily Damari, one of the hostages, who's both a Spurs fan and the Spurs football supporters had all been out really supporting her. But more importantly, is a Maccabi fan. Her family, I mean, they were kind of like, what happened there, right? We were looking forward to going to a match. Aston Villa were, a football team that were a bit like, well, we're not objecting to it. And football fans, generally speaking, do not wander around saying we're frightened of the football fans. I mean, that isn't what happens. So there was kind of attempts at blaming all sorts of things and making out that the community around the ground were frightened of these fans.
Yeah.
Now, at the same time, we'd also all watched the videos of the activists who were absolutely explicitly anti-Semitic in what they were saying about we don't want them here. It's like explicit that they were saying this is a Jew-free area and we don't want them anywhere near it. So we already knew in a way that the police had never challenged that. To find out that they had actually, made up the evidence, but that they'd actually had reports from, is it Amsterdam?
Yeah.
The Amsterdam police that basically explained that most of the stories that were being used about people being thrown in the canal in Amsterdam, actually, it was Maccabi fans who were being thrown in the canal, not Maccabi fans throwing anyone else in them. That they were the victims over in Amsterdam, and not to say that Maccabi fans weren't involved in some pretty brutal fights there, because, there was fights. But that actually the police just sat on that information, and they therefore have completely, explicitly, knowingly lied. And I think that when you then hear about the local community would get armed, this is what we suspected happened in a lot of the, even in the riots in some ways, which is you could see the police say, remember those gangs of lads who basically said, we're coming out with our baseball bats. They were all kind of odd, and they sort of said, look, if we keep them away from you, will you please doing deals, right? In other words, put your weapons in the mosque. Drop your weapons at the mosque. And then the story would come out that, far right were rampaging around. And we were all watching this thinking it's like being gaslit constantly. Anyway, the outcome of this is people keep saying that the head of West Midlands Police has to resign. And that's fine, along, accountability and all that. And I don't want him to get away with it. Certainly that's true. Can't get away with it, really. But I just think it's deeper than that. It's a far bigger problem. And Birmingham is a city in which you then feel, if the authorities in Birmingham are so frightened of what they perceive to be local Islamist-inspired intolerance of Jews, or presumably anyone who doesn't go along with them on Gaza. Well, we know that's true because we all saw what happened during the general election. And Birmingham was pretty febrile, where those gangs were going around saying, don't vote for so-and-so because they, you know what I mean, intimidating candidates in the election. The government of the day, Labour, who got in then, admitted that that was happening, said they would tackle it. And then there's a report somewhere on defending democracy that they've never actually dragged out. So I think that it means that we're in serious trouble in lots of cities because the authorities, just like with the grooming gangs, are running scared of being accused of being Islamophobic and so on.
Tom, it's a damning indictment of the entire multicultural state, because this is precisely who it empowers, sectarians who are willing to intimidate, to menace, to try and bend the state to its will. And that's precisely what has happened here, empowered by official cowardice, absolutely. But at the same time, this is what, under the kind of banner of Kumbaya and different communities and so on and so forth, you end up with differential treatment and the essentially rewarding people if they are willing to threaten certain forms of action. I think Birmingham, in some respects, is just further along the track than various other parts of the UK. It's not simply that the police are quite clearly unwilling to police, particularly the British Muslim community, or at least the sections of it who want to play this sectarian game, supposedly on behalf of all of the community. I mean, as you said, Claire, we saw that in the wake of the riots, those scenes in Borsley Green in Birmingham, where you had kind of tooled up young Muslim men, masked up, who were menacing journalists who went there, both a Sky News crew and an LBC crew, were threatened. I think the tyres were slashed of one of their radio cars as well, basically chased out of the area. You can see footage where the police cars just kind of do one turn around the roundabout and then sheepishly move on down the road. I mean, this has been obvious to anyone certainly who lives in that city for some time. And the fact that the rot goes deeper, because you not only have a police force which is bending over backwards to accommodate these people, but also you have Islamic sectarian MPs in the area, and you also have Islamic sectarians who are basically welcomed in. And you see this in police forces across the country as advisors for moments like this.
Incredible. Yeah. They went to the mosques to get advice. And mosques who had invited in explicitly political Islamists who are notoriously, notorious in police circles, will be on, one would hope, on somebody's prevent list or terrorism watch list, right? Yeah. They're kind of well known, and they allowed that to happen. I think that the other thing that, is kind of gets lost in this, which is understandable, was when the match actually happened, if you remember, there was a bit of a protest.
Yeah.
It was, you were at that. Well, you can tell this story better than I can then, but what I was going to say was a bit of a protest going on, or vigil, or act of solidarity, and people were held in back. Penned, right, and treated like criminals. And Nick Timothy got involved, and because they were going to the match and they were basically treated like criminals in Austin, treated like criminals, and so thought, this can't be right. How has it become such a situation? I think you're really right, Tom, to just emphasize, because there's cowardice, but you can't help but feel that the multicultural police force are broadly sympathetic to the fact that the local Islamist supporting MPs and activists have a point. They haven't instinctively at any point thought, isn't this a bit odd? And so you just know that it's more than cowardice. It's a bit more of a kind of sympathetic, this is the community we serve. And any of these outsiders are dangerous. They think it's the Maccabi fans who are the extremists. They think it's the R5 crowd or the campaign against anti-Semitism that's the extremists. They're the ones you kind of want to contain behind a pen.
And having been up there when the match was actually held, obviously without the fans, but Maccabi Tel Aviv did go there and play. It was a really striking demonstration of how very real the sectarian problem is. I mean, there was this pretty large demonstration on one side of Villa Park. As soon as we got there, people chanting from the stage, Allahu Akbar, and all the rest of it, constantly telling the younger members of the crowd not to be violent, not to mask up. Meanwhile, in the trees that kind of line that side of Villa Park, young men masking up, looking and hoping for trouble, essentially. You then had a lot of kind of Villa fans wandering around furious that they were being redirected so much to get into the ground, and a lot of the pubs were closed. And then, of course, this very courageous but smaller group of British Jews, as well as their allies, who were holding this small demonstration, who had to meet in a car park about 15 minutes walk away, had a police escort that was at least as numerous as they were, and then were ushered in to a caged basketball court, all the while having baby killers and so on and so forth shouted at them from without. So it was a perfect demonstration of the fact that these divides are very real. The point is that as a society you have to confront them, not counter to them, and that is the opposite.
That's what I enjoyed on the night, and I don't often say that I enjoy this chant, but was when some of the Aston Villa fans in response started shouting Tommy Robinson, you know. And the reason they did it was not because they were all Tommy Robinson supporters, because they knew it was a kind of alternative to the Al-Out thing. You know what I mean? A kind of like a way of saying, I mean, you know, I'm not a great Tommy fan, but it was just more that kind of like, because they were just sort of dragged in. And one point was made was people said, well, a lot of fans stayed away because they were worried about the trouble. Yeah. But they knew that there wasn't going to be any trouble for Maccabi fans. But actually, that match had been turned into a political football, so the pun. And in a way, it's one of the problems about football being politicised in that way. I mean, just very unhelpful. But yeah, very worrying. Anyway, this is going to run and run. I think this could be a little bit like the Greenland gang scandal, but it's certainly a very important moment.
Definitely. And our conversation does not end there, because you can join us over on Spiked Podcast Unlocked, where we'll be discussing Keir Starmer's botched New Year's reset, his Brexit betrayal, and Reform UK's selection for London Mayor. So if you're a Spike supporter, you can join us there right now. And if you're not a Spike supporter, you can sign up now by going to spiked-online.com/support. See you there. Thank you so much for watching the Spiked podcast. We'll be back at the same time next week. In the meantime, why not subscribe to Spike's YouTube channel and then click the bell so you're always alerted whenever there's some new content. Spiked is producing more videos than ever, from podcasts like this one to interviews to our series of polemics. You really, really don't want to miss out on it. Plus, to get your daily dose of Spiked, just go to spiked-online.com. That's our website at spiked-online.com.